who is sort of a science raconteur. She's an immunologist. She is the executive director of the American Lyme Disease Association. She talks a lot about how science has been misconstrued in the media.
Yeah. So, and I think, you're right. And on a lot of those things, I'm not an expert in optic nerve signaling, and I would never purport to be, because just like you said, scientists have these niches of expertise. Scientists, and you have healthcare providers or clinicians, and those are not one and the same as well. But, what I started to notice is that he was often making statements or claims about an impact to human health that was not supported by human evidence, frequently cherry picking. So he's selectively excerpting a study that is not an appropriate research model. They're not going to go fact check. They're not going to go do a literature review and kind of verify this. They're going to take him at his word because he says, well, I'm a professor of ophthalmology at Stanford. Episode where he was joined by Robert Lustig, and they were doing the whole demonizing of fructose. And I mean, that's been Robert Lustig's shtick for decades.
You bumped into the ceiling, which now has to be washed and sterilized, so you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
And I think that's another differentiator here is that, his solo episodes are one thing, but then he often has guests on to join him, and it's purported as, well, they're going to be the experts on this topic because it's not my expertise. Spread pseudoscience about regulating your hormones through diet. She is not.
So I'm going to try my best here. This is not my expertise, but I have done some research. I already knew what she was saying was BS. I had suspicions maybe she's actually the one being funded by animal agriculture. Who the hell is pro corn syrup, pro sugar, pro diabetes? What? Like, none of this makes any sense. So I'm starting from the very beginning, since I was never good at biology. Metabolic flexibility. Metabolic flexibility refers to the ability of our body's metabolism to adapt efficiently, utilize different energy sources based on availability. Involves switching between using carbohydrates, glucose, fats, lipids, and proteins as fuel. When our metabolic flexibility is optimal, we can efficiently convert nutrients into energy, which is essential for maintaining overall health. So, and then we have gonadal hormones and metabolic flexibility. Estrogen, for example, affects how our body handles glucose and lipids. Remember this, estrogen. These hormones can regulate mitochondrial function, impacting energy production and utilization. Reduced estrogen levels can lead to changes in fat distribution, insulin sensitivity, and overall energy metabolism. Onto mitochondria. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of our cells. They are responsible for generating most of the cell's energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Mitochondria process various substrates such as glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids through metabolic pathways like the citric and acid cycle, TCA cycle, and oxidative, not going to say that. These pathways produce ATP, which fuels cellular processes and maintains our body's functions. So I'm going to this one first. Gonadal hormones might regulate metabolic flexibility at the level of the mitochondria, determining how nutrients are converted into energy. Guess I should have tagged this here, but I'm new to this. Red meat consumption associated with increased type 2 diabetes. Why I'm mentioning this is because insulin is a hormone.
Spread pseudoscience about regulating your hormones through diet.
So, yep, you can see where this is going. Red meat intake and risk of type 2 diabetes in a prospective cohort study of the United States females and males. There's actually multiple studies. But here we're going now with this one. A plant-based meal increases gastrointestinal hormones and satiety more than an energy and macronutrient match processed meat meal in T2D obese and healthy men. A 3-group randomized crossover study. As you see here, Our results indicate that there's an increase in gut hormones and satiety. I never say that. Following consumption of a single plant-based meal with tofu when compared with an energy and macronutrient matched processed meat and cheese meal in healthy, obese, and diabetic men. Then if we go down here, obesity substantially increases the risk of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain types of cancer. Lifestyle change, including improved dietary choices,
regulating your hormones through diet.
represents a primary prevention tool. The influence of diet and the development of insulin resistance, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes was investigated intensively. Gastrointestinal hormones are involved in regulation of glucose metabolism, energy, homeostasis, satiety, and weight management. Ingestion of food triggers secretion of incretin hormones from the gastrointestinal tract, namely glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1, and gastric inhibitory peptide, GIP, which enhance insulin secretion and help maintain glucose homeostasis. Furthermore, the safety. Prospective observational studies indicate that consumption of red meat is positively associated with incidence of type 2 diabetes. This association is particularly strong for processed meat.
And first of all, there's no standard definition of what an ultra processed food is. You know, I've written about a lot about the fear mongering as it relates to processing of foods.
People consuming any processed meats have a 1/3 higher likelihood to develop diabetes compared with those who do not consume any. Several studies have demonstrated a harmful effect of saturated fatty acids from meat and other animal products on insulin resistance and glucose tolerance, as well as other health issues such as cardiovascular disease. In contrast, people following plant-based diets have their risk of diabetes cut in half compared with non-vegetarians. Several randomized clinical trials and participants with type 2 diabetes demonstrated a greater increase in insulin sensitivity and improvement in glycemic control with a plant-based diet when compared with a conventional diet. So I'm just going to keep dropping the mic here. We investigated postprandial metabolism in response to 2 meals matched for energy and macronutrient content, a processed meat and cheeseburger, and a plant-based burger with tofu. We measured the physiological response to these meals in men with type 2 diabetes, body mass index BMI, and age-matched obese, normal glycemic men, and healthy age-matched controls. A hypothesis is that a plant-based meal produces higher levels of gastrointestinal hormones and increased satiety in men with type 2 diabetes or obesity while having a negligible effect on healthy men. Our results will provide insight into physiologic mechanisms of the development of type 2 diabetes we used to inform the evidence base for dietary guidelines for men with type 2 diabetes. There you go. All right, now where do we go from here? There's also this. So, diet and reproductive hormones, a study of vegetarians. So this goes all the way back to 1981. So it's like she doesn't even try being honest. She is not intellectually honest at all. Diet and reproductive hormones, a study of vegetarian and non-vegetarian postmenopausal women. In comparison with matched non-vegetarian women, postmenopausal vegetarian women were found to have lower urinary levels of estriol and total estrogens, which is what? Estrogen is a hormone. Yep. Lower plasma prolactin levels and higher plasma sex hormone binding globulin SHBG levels. These differences were not explained by differences in body weight or obesity. Plasma SHBG levels were highly correlated with plasma high-density lipoprotein cholesterol levels, which were also higher in vegetarians than in non-vegetarians. These hormonal differences may explain the lower rates of an endometrial and possibly breast cancer that have been observed previously in vegetarian women. Yeah, lower urinary levels of estriol and total estrogen. So they have less estrogen, which means you can regulate your hormones. And again, here we go down here. Does a plant-based diet affect hormones? Well, everything on Google seems to say so. Plant-based support hormone balance that leads to weight balance, insulin, thyroid hormone, and cortisol, in addition to estrogen, are important for weight. Whole plant food supports insulin and balanced blood sugar and are needed for an appropriate thyroid hormone response. Some studies have shown that people who follow vegetarian or semi-vegetarian diets have lower estrogen levels and a reduced risk of certain cancers associated with elevated estrogen. Oh my god. So it's almost like the facts just keep going like in my favor for this. Let's see here. Insulin is an essential hormone produced by the pancreas. Its main role is to control glucose levels in our bodies. This is actually Harvard 2023, as you can see right here. Replacing red meat with a plant-based protein sources may reduce risk of diabetes and provide environmental benefits. Another mic drop. People who eat just 2 servings of red meat per week may have an increased risk of developing type 2 diabetes compared to people who eat fewer servings, and the risk increases with greater consumption, according to a new study led by researchers from Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. They also found that replacing red meat with healthy plant-based protein sources such as nuts and legumes or modest amounts of dairy food was associated with reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. And then here's the rest of the study. Red meat intake and risk of type 2 diabetes in a prospective cohort. We aim to assess the relationships of intakes of total processed and unprocessed red meat to risk of T2D and to estimate the effects of substituting different protein sources for red meats on T2D risk. Our study included 216,695 participants, 81% females, from the Nurses Health Study, NHS, NHS2, and Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. Red meat intakes were assessed with semi-quantitative food frequency questionnaires, FFQs, every 2 to 4 years since the study baselines. We use multivariable adjust proportional hazard models to estimate the associations between red meats and T2D. Sounds like a droid from Star Wars, dang it. 5 million person years follow-up. Years of follow-up. We documented 22,761 T2D cases, intakes of total processed and unprocessed red meat, were positively and approximately linearly associated with higher risks of T2D, comparing
spread pseudoscience about regulating your hormones through diet.
Comparing the highest to the lowest quintiles, hazard ratios were 1.62, 95% confidence interval for total red meat, 95% for processed red meat, and 1.40, just barely a little bit, just a few digits lower, for unprocessed red meat. The percentage lower risk of T2D associated with substituting 1 serving of nuts and legumes for total red meat was 30%, for processed red meat was 41%, and for unprocessed red meat was 29%. Substituting 1 serving a day of dairy for total processed or unprocessed red meat was also associated with significantly lower risk of T2D. The observed association becomes stronger after we calibrated dietary intakes to intakes assessed by weighted diet records. And then, as you'll see here, there's even more. There's more studies if you want to read. There's a meta-analysis. It goes on because the facts are consistent. It's almost as if, like, this was always the case. People just didn't want to believe it. Corporations like animal agriculture, dairy, all that bullshit that's basically killing the planet according to science and should be stopped. But of course, no one's going to want to sacrifice or do anything. And of course, this reporter isn't honest enough to report on a single one of this. I've been collecting so many studies trying to map things out, and it's like, dude, what has he done? Like, yeah, you exposed a YouTuber. Great. Okay. He's still up. He's still interviewing people, so clearly you're not that effective at your job. I mean, are you a reporter or are you a YouTuber? Because I seem to recall you falling head first into Wim Hof and becoming basically a cult member of his. And then you did the exact same thing with Andrew Huberman. And you're the investigative journalist or whatever, the reporter, right? Doesn't that set a bad precedent? Like, I mean, come on. You were supposed to interview them to make sure they weren't what they actually came to realize later were the whole time. You're the one that was supposed to find that out for us. And you just dove into their cults and shit, their cult-like rationality of being a stan. And it's like, come on, dude, you shouldn't stand for anyone. Not anyone. If you're gonna stand for anything, stand for factual evidence that is consistent. Don't stand for people that you brought her on solely because she's gonna talk bad about Andrew Huberman. That's the only reason you brought her on. You didn't fact check her. You didn't stop her once in the middle of her making all these wild claims. I mean, it's pretty fucking psychopathic to say that high fructose corn syrup is good for you. Who the fuck says that? Are you fucking kidding me? So many people have diabetes. Like, Jesus fucking Christ. Directly linked to Alzheimer's. Corn syrup is linked to Alzheimer's. Of course, you're not reporting on this, are you? No, I am. You don't do any editing in any of your videos. You don't do jump cuts. You don't do anything. You don't add subtitles. You do the bare minimum as a reporter. You know, do better. That's not hard. It's really not that hard.
This doesn't quite match up to reality.
Women.